Marching through scorching deserts with no modern gear, how did Roman soldiers survive? From water discipline to brutal endurance training, here's how the legions endured the deadliest heat on Earth. Roman soldiers adapted their clothing to cope with searing desert temperatures. Instead of heavy armor, a marching legionary often wore just a light wool tunic and a hooded cloak, sagum, over his shoulders. These garments were loose and breathable, allowing air circulation and sweat evaporation. Wool might seem counterintuitive for heat, but its natural fibers insulate against both heat and cold, protecting the skin from direct sun while wicking away sweat. In some desert outposts like Egypt, soldiers even wore specialized felt caps or wide-brimmed hats to shield their heads from sun and sandstorms. A rare surviving hat shows how a broad brim kept the sun off a soldier's face. The standard metal helmet, if worn, provided shade for the face and neck thanks to its brim and neck guard, but troops often lined it with cloth or leather for insulation against the hot metal. Footwear was also crucial. Roman sandals, caligae, had thick soles and ventilation for cooling, sometimes worn with socks or wraps to prevent burns from scorching sand. In essence, Roman soldiers dressed in layers of natural fabric, shedding or adjusting gear as needed, and used every part of their uniform to mitigate the desert's heat by day and its chill at night. Water and hydration tactics. Staying hydrated was the single biggest key to surviving a desert march. Each Roman soldier carried a personal water skin, a leather canteen, on the march, refilling it whenever possible. Water was treated like liquid gold, rationed carefully and never wasted. The army also brought along extra water on supply carts or pack animals, stored in large leather bags, wooden casks, or clay jars. Commanders planned routes from one water source to the next, whether it be a river, oasis, or well, and scouts went ahead to ensure these sources were usable. When a legion made camp near a water source, they often sent a large detachment, hundreds of men, to fill all the canteens and barrels for the rest of the army, while everyone else set up camp. This way, the whole unit could top up their supplies efficiently. Roman soldiers also drank a mixture called pasca, water mixed with a bit of vinegar, which helped make stagnant or suspect water safer and more palatable, while the sour taste encouraged soldiers to sip slowly rather than gulp, important for preventing illness or water loss. Discipline in drinking was vital. Soldiers were trained to drink small, frequent sips instead of draining their flask in one go. They knew that staying slightly damp with sweat was good. It meant the body was cooling itself. In extreme cases, Roman officers would delay marching during the hottest part of the day to conserve water and strength, and if water ran dangerously low, drastic measures might be taken. There are tales of armies slaughtering camels for the water in their stomachs, or digging desperately for groundwater. Overall, meticulous water discipline and clever resupply tactics allowed Roman armies to survive thirst even in arid wastelands. Formation and marching for endurance. Marching in formation wasn't just for show. It was a practical way to maintain endurance and order. Roman legions typically moved in a steady column, with soldiers keeping a regular pace and spacing. This organized rhythm helped prevent exhaustion. A consistent cadence, around 100 steps a minute at a regular march, meant the army could cover ground efficiently without overexertion, and no individual was forced to run or lag behind. Centurions and officers set the pace from the front and kept stragglers in line, so morale stayed high and nobody got left alone in the desert. The tight formation also reduced each soldier's effort fighting through sand or rough ground. The group naturally created a path, with the front ranks breaking the trail or clearing obstacles, and those behind following in their footsteps. Soldiers would periodically rotate positions as well. Those in front, who had the hardest work setting the path or taking the brunt of dust and wind, would fall back and let others take over, ensuring no group was over-fatigued. In the event of a midday break or a sudden sandstorm, the unit could even bunch up and use their large shields for shade or wind protection in a pinch. An improvised tortoise of shields overhead could offer temporary relief from sun and blowing sand. By marching in a cohesive unit with established rest intervals, the legion as a whole could endure long distances that would have overwhelmed an unruly, scattered crowd. The formation gave them not only protection from enemy ambush, but also a psychological boost. Every soldier kept step knowing the whole line was in it together, one foot after the other until they reached the next camp. Supply lines and pack animals. Even the toughest soldiers couldn't survive the desert without supplies, so Roman logistics were carefully organized for these marches. A legion on the move was accompanied by a baggage train carrying food, water, and equipment. Pack animals were the workhorses of desert logistics. Mules and donkeys were common, and in particularly dry regions, the Romans also employed camels, which were superbly adapted to arid conditions. Camels could carry heavy loads of gear or water and go several days with minimal drinking, so they were invaluable in places like Syria and Egypt. These beasts of burden hauled extra water in large skins and grain rations for the troops, as well as fodder for other animals. Roman planners had to strike a balance. Every pack animal that carried water also needed water to survive, so they brought just enough to sustain the army and the animals to the next oasis. To maximize efficiency, non-essential gear was trimmed down during desert treks. For instance, on especially tough marches, generals would order soldiers to carry only what was absolutely needed: water, food, and weapons, leaving behind or sending ahead heavy siege equipment or luxuries. They sometimes pre-positioned caches of water and supplies along the route, if they had friendly locals or earlier expeditions to set them up, so that the army could resupply midway through a barren stretch. Upon reaching a well or spring, the troops might water the animals first and refill every vessel before continuing. Roman military engineers could also improvise by digging wells or cisterns at camps if they suspected groundwater, showcasing a rudimentary ability to bring water with them via engineering. Thanks to this robust support system of animals and logistics, Roman armies could march for days through areas with no natural food or water, essentially carrying their lifeline with them. It wasn't fast or light travel, but it was effective. The legions made sure that wherever they went, their supplies followed. Discipline, training, and mental fortitude. Perhaps the greatest factor in surviving a desert march was the mindset of the Roman soldier. Legionaries were professional soldiers drilled to endure hardship. Their training included regular long marches carrying full packs, often around 20 miles a day with equipment, which built incredible stamina and conditioned them to discomfort. This wasn't just physical preparation, it was mental conditioning. Soldiers developed a stoic attitude toward extreme heat, thirst, and fatigue. Units developed strong camaraderie. An 8-man tent group, contubernium, lived, ate, and marched together, so each soldier had buddies to encourage him when the going got tough. There was a pride in the legion that made individuals willing to suffer now for the promise of victory and glory later. Commanders also led by example. Generals like Julius Caesar and others were known to march alongside their troops on foot in harsh conditions, sharing the same sun and thirst, which inspired the ranks to persevere. Romans might not have understood modern science of hydration or heat stroke, but through experience they knew the limits of their bodies and how far they could be pushed. They learned to pace themselves, conserve energy during the hottest hours, and stay focused on the goal. This mental resilience meant that even under a blazing desert sun with mirages on the horizon, Roman soldiers kept their formation moving step by step. Discipline and esprit de corps filled in the gaps where gear and technology were lacking. The knowledge that each legionary had endured tough training and that their entire culture valued toughness gave them an edge in surviving the desert where others might have given up. Managing terrain and paced desert terrain is challenging and varied, from open sand dunes to rocky plains, and the Romans adjusted their marching methods to handle it while preserving energy. If they had to cross sand dunes, the pace slowed and the columns stretched out to prevent men and animals from bunching up and churning the sand, which can be exhausting. The army's engineers might even prepare the way, filling in soft patches or clearing rocks to make the march smoother. Time of day was another tool to beat the terrain. In extreme heat, Roman armies often started marching before dawn to use the cool morning hours for as much distance as possible. By midday, when the sun was overhead and the ground scorching, they would halt if circumstances allowed, resting in whatever shade they could find or create. A mid-afternoon siesta wasn't laziness. It was life-saving in the desert. They would resume travel in late afternoon or early evening when temperatures dropped. In some cases, armies resorted to night marches to cover ground without the sun's intensity. Marching under the stars could be confusing and risky, but it conserved water and strength. Roman soldiers on night march stayed close together and likely used the light of the moon or torches to keep formation. The desert nights, while cold, were preferable to relentless daytime heat for very long treks. Maintaining a steady pace was crucial on any terrain. Soldiers were taught not to charge or run during a march unless absolutely necessary. The standard pace, around 4 to 5 kilometers per hour, was kept uniform so that the whole column moved as one body. If steep hills or dunes slowed the front, the rest slowed as well, preventing gaps that could strain the rear guard or cause some men to rush. Commanders also knew when to push hard versus when to go easy. For example, if the next water source was a long distance away, they might decide to force march a bit faster or longer in one day to reach it, rather than camp out and risk dehydration. Conversely, if the terrain was very difficult, they'd shorten the day's march to avoid wearing out the troops. By intelligently managing when and how they moved, factoring in terrain, temperature, and the location of resources, the Romans maximized their endurance. In practical terms, this meant an army could cross a desert in controlled stages, moving when conditions were favorable, pausing when nature was at its cruelest, and never straying far from the plan. This systematic approach to pacing and terrain is how ancient soldiers traversed lands that would challenge even modern hikers. In the end, Roman soldiers survived desert marches not with any one miraculous trick, but with a combination of pragmatic adaptations and iron discipline. They endured the desert the same way they won their wars, with training, teamwork, and sheer perseverance.